Picture this. It's 1989, and you're standing on a California airstrip, staring at something that looks like an F-117 stealth fighter mated with a Lamborghini Countach. Under that angular body sits a twin-turbocharged American V8, producing 625 horsepower, more than the Ferrari F40, more than the Lamborghini Diablo, more than the Porsche 959, and the man who built it, Gerald Wiegert, a designer with zero manufacturing experience who constructed this aerospace fantasy in a warehouse in Wilmington, California. Before this story ends, you'll witness burned carpets, broken test cars, armed guards barricading a factory, comparisons to Waco, Indonesian billionaires seizing control, and a tennis superstar who nearly died behind the wheel. This is the Vector W8 Twin Turbo, the most ambitious American supercar ever built, and possibly the most spectacular failure in automotive history. Let those numbers sink in. 625 horsepower in 1989. The Ferrari F40, the poster on every teenager's wall, made 478. The brand new Lamborghini Diablo produced 485. The legendary Porsche 959, 444. The Vector had more power than all of them, and it was built in a California warehouse by a company that had never mass-produced a single automobile. Car and driver tested it at 3.8 seconds to 60, matching the mighty F40, quarter mile in 12 seconds flat. And the production run? Just 19 cars, 17 customer vehicles, and 2 pre-production prototypes. 19 examples of American aerospace insanity actually delivered to paying customers. Gerald Wiegert was born in 1944 in Dearborn, Michigan, the heart of American automotive manufacturing. He worked for the Big Three before attending Art Center College of Design in California. In 1971, he founded Vector Motors with just 4 employees and an impossible dream: to build an American supercar using aerospace technology, fighter jet materials, and military specification components. His inspiration: the Alfa Romeo Carrabbo concept by Marcello Gandini, the same designer who created the Countach. Wiegert looked at European supercars and thought, America can do this better. Not with Italian passion or German precision, but with aerospace engineering. The construction was genuine aerospace. A semi-aluminum monocoque with honeycomb panels bonded with epoxy adhesive and secured by over 5,000 aircraft-grade rivets. The body panels were carbon fiber and Kevlar composites, materials that most automakers wouldn't touch for another decade. And here's the kicker. It reportedly passed every required crash test on the first attempt, with Wiegert famously claiming it was, quote, the safest car that had ever been tested, end quote. He even claimed the front impact tests barely scratched the core chassis. While some of his crash test stories bordered on mythology, the aerospace construction proved this wasn't a fiberglass kit car bolted to a Corvette frame. This was legitimate aerospace engineering adapted for the street. The power plant was a Rodeck aluminum racing block, essentially a bulletproof racing spec evolution of the classic Chevy small block. 6.0 liters, 365 cubic inches of American V8 Fury. But the magic came from the forced induction, twin Garrett A research turbochargers, the same company that supplied turbos for actual fighter jets. At the conservative 8 psi setting, the engine produced 625 horsepower and 649 pound-feet of torque. But Wiegert installed an adjustable boost controller, crank it to 14 psi, and the factory dyno showed 1,200 horsepower. Was that street sustainable? Absolutely not. The transmission would likely grenade, and nobody ran, sustained 14 psi on public roads. But the engine could produce it. The raw capability existed. And here's where it gets beautifully absurd. That 1,200 horsepower potential, channeled through a General Motors turbo. Hydromatic 425 3 speeds, originally designed for the Oldsmobile Toronado front-wheel drive luxury sedan. Vector heavily modified it, strengthened internals, added a torque converter that could theoretically handle the abuse, and a massive chain drive system to transfer the power. But still, a $450,000 aerospace supercar using your grandmother's Toronado transmission. Wiegert's justification: the massive torque made additional gears unnecessary. The real answer? Building a custom transmission would have cost millions they didn't have. Step inside, and you entered a fighter jet cockpit. The instrument panel featured digital displays glowing amber orange like military avionics. There was an actual aircraft, airpath compass, standard equipment in Cessnas and Pipers. A Hobbs meter, the flight hours counter used in aviation to track engine time. Military specification toggle switches and aircraft circuit breakers lined the center console. The driver's seat was offset toward the center for better weight distribution, just like a single-seat fighter. Recaro seats with electronic adjustment, inflatable lumbar support, and seat heaters. Scissor doors that swung up like a Countach. Air conditioning was standard because even aerospace engineers understood California summers. The suspension was equally exotic. Double A-arm front with adjustable Coney dampers and a D-Dion tube rear axle located by 4 trailing arms anchored directly to the firewall. No anti-lock brakes. Wiegert considered them unnecessary weight. No power steering. Again, weight reduction. Stopping power came from 13-inch vented discs with 4-piston Alcon aluminum calipers, genuine racing equipment. The result? 0.97 G on the skid pad, the highest lateral acceleration of any production car tested that year. When the Vector worked, it worked. But aerospace engineering doesn't come cheap. The initial projected price of around $150,000 quickly doubled, then doubled again. By the end of production, a Vector W8 cost approximately $450,000, roughly $900,000 in today's money. For comparison, a Ferrari F40 cost around $400,000, a Lamborghini Diablo $240,000, a Corvette ZR1 $60,000. The Vector was the most expensive American production car ever built by a massive margin. And for that money, you got one of exactly 19 examples, 17 customer cars and 2 pre-production units. 6,025 horsepower, 3.8 seconds to 60, 12-second quarter miles, 0.97 G lateral acceleration, only 19 built. Let that sink in. Because remarkable engineering doesn't always mean reliable engineering. In May 1991, car and driver attempted a full road test, and the results were catastrophic. Vector provided 3 separate cars, and all 3 suffered mechanical failures of different types. The magazine still managed to record that blistering 3.8-second 0 to 60 and 12-second quarter mile before the cars gave up. Years later, in 2017, Car and Driver used the W8 as their textbook example of vaporware, a product announced with massive fanfare that barely materialized. But here's the thing. Those performance numbers were real. The cars just couldn't survive the testing. Road and Track told a different story. Their tests, in March 1991 and August 1992, actually worked. They recorded 4.2 seconds to 60 and 12 seconds flat in the quarter mile, slightly slower than Car and Driver, but still supercar territory. The magazine concluded with, quote, "Hats off to Gerald Wiegert," end quote. Genuine respect for the achievement. They estimated 218 miles per hour top speed based on gear ratios and redline calculations. Vector themselves claimed 218 to 242, with an internal Bonneville test allegedly hitting 242 with a detuned engine, never independently verified. But both magazines were right. When the Vector worked, it matched or exceeded every European rival. 1991, tennis superstar Andre Agassi wrote a check for approximately $400,000 for a Vector W8. But there was a condition: store it. Don't drive it until emission systems were properly adjusted. Agassi, being Agassi, ignored the warning and took it for a desert blast in Las Vegas anyway. The exhaust system overheated. The catalytic converter got so hot, it melted the rear carpet. His brother Philip Agassi later told Newsweek magazine, quote, "The car was basically a death trap. He was scared the whole thing would blow up," end quote. Agassi got his money back. That specific car now sits in the Peterson Automotive Museum, carpet presumably replaced. Hollywood came calling. In 1993, a red Vector W8, chassis number 003, appeared in Rising Sun starring Sean Connery and Wesley Snipes. The car featured prominently in a chase sequence before dramatically crashing and exploding on screen. The Vector also appeared in the 1990 Flash television series, because what else would a superhero drive? But by 1993, Vector Motors had much bigger problems than movie contracts. Indonesian problems. Vector had always struggled financially. Building aerospace supercars in tiny quantities isn't exactly a profitable business model. Wiegert found investors, Megatech Limited, an Indonesian conglomerate with government backing. The same Megatech that had just purchased Lamborghini from Chrysler. But the partnership quickly soured. Megatech systematically dried up funding, forced layoffs, and pushed the company toward default. Then, in March 1993, the board of directors, now controlled by Megatech, voted to terminate Gerald Wiegert as president of his own company. Wiegert did not go quietly. He hired armed security guards, changed all the locks, barricaded himself inside the Vector factory. The press compared the standoff to Waco, which had happened just weeks earlier. Eventually, court orders forced Wiegert out. Megatech relocated operations to Florida, fired most of the California staff, and began developing new models using Lamborghini components. The aerospace purity that defined Vector was gone, replaced by Indonesian management and Italian drivetrains. Years of lawsuits followed. Wiegert eventually won, recovering his original designs, equipment, and unsold W8 inventory. But Megatech had already produced the M12, a Vector-styled body with Lamborghini Diablo running gear. They built a handful before the entire enterprise collapsed. Megatech went bankrupt in 1999, and in a bizarre twist, Lamborghini, now owned by Audi, accepted several unsold Vector W8s as partial payment for outstanding debts. Wiegert continued developing Vector concepts until his death on January 15, 2021, at age 76, never building another production car. 19 cars, $450,000 each, sub-4 second acceleration, fighter jet cockpit, armed guards at the factory, comparisons to Waco, Indonesian gangsters seizing control. This was either the most ambitious American supercar ever built, or the most elaborate delusion in automotive history, probably both. Consider what Wiegert accomplished. The W8 produced 147 more horsepower than the Ferrari F40, 140 more than the Lamborghini Diablo, 181 more than the Porsche 959. It was the most powerful supercar available anywhere when it launched. Ferrari had been building cars since 1947, Lamborghini since 1963, Porsche since 1931, Vector since 1989 with zero prior production experience, operating from a warehouse in Wilmington, California. What were the American alternatives in 1992? The Dodge Viper, 8 liters naturally aspirated, 400 horsepower, brutal simplicity, no roof, no windows, pure aggression. The Corvette ZR1, 375 horsepower, Lotus engineered DOHC V8, $60,000 of accessible performance. And then the Vector, aerospace construction, twin turbos, adjustable boost, fighter jet cockpit, $450,000 of pure insanity. 3 completely different philosophies: brute force, value engineering, and aerospace. Only one survived into the modern era. Spoiler, it wasn't the one with the Hobbs flight meter. The Vector W8 mattered because it proved Americans could build genuine supercars, not just muscle cars with better suspension, but actual world-class exotics. It demonstrated that aerospace construction techniques could work in automotive applications. It showed that a small team with enough ambition could match or exceed European performance. But it also demonstrated the danger of building dreams without manufacturing infrastructure. Every American exotic that followed, the Ford GT, the Saleen S7, the SSC Tuatara, learned from Vector's mistakes. Let's be honest about what worked and what didn't. The aerospace construction worked. The monocoque was genuinely strong and safe. The engine worked. The Rodec block was bulletproof when properly maintained. The performance verified. Multiple independent tests confirmed supercar acceleration. But the systems around them? Disaster. The transmission was adapted from a completely different application. The electronics were hand-built with varying quality. The cooling systems were marginal at best. And the customer support infrastructure for 19 scattered cars was essentially non-existent. Wiegert's vision was never the problem. His execution was building cars with 5,000 hand-installed aircraft rivets meant inevitable inconsistency. Using a GM transmission adapted far beyond its design limits meant expected failures. Producing only 19 units meant no economies of scale for parts or service. The aerospace industry builds jets with unlimited budgets and military contracts. Vector tried to apply those techniques to a $450,000 car built by a few dozen employees. Vision alone isn't enough. You need infrastructure, capital, and manufacturing discipline. Today, surviving Vector W8s are genuine collector pieces. In 2020, RM Sotheby's sold a purple example at their Arizona auction for $720,000. Private sales have reportedly exceeded 1.4 million. Compare that to Ferrari F40s now trading over 2 million, or Lamborghini Countach 25th anniversary editions approaching 1 million. The Vector is finally getting the collector recognition it deserves, though finding qualified service is nearly impossible. Most owners locate aerospace engineers rather than automotive mechanics. The W8's design was pure 1980s vision of the future. Inspired by the Alfa Romeo Carrabbo, refined through wind tunnel testing, executed with aerospace precision. The sharp angles, hidden headlights, aggressive rear diffuser, and louvered engine cover created a shape that still looks futuristic today. The scissor doors weren't just Countach imitation. They were necessary given the wide sills and low roofline. This was what the 1980s thought cars would look like in 2000. One of the most visually influential supercars ever created, even if most people never saw one in person. At the Geneva Auto Show in January 1993, just weeks before the Megatech takeover, Vector displayed the AWX3 and AWX3R concepts. The AWX3R featured all-wheel drive, a 7-speed manual transmission developed in-house, and evolved styling that addressed many W8 criticisms. It represented everything the W8 could have become if the company had survived. Neither concept reached production under Wiegert's control. Megatech instead developed the M12 using Lamborghini components, faster to market but lacking the aerospace purity that defined Vector. Matched Ferrari in acceleration, exceeded everyone in horsepower, looked like the 21st century while still in the 20th, and it was undone by transmission failures, burned carpets, armed standoffs, and Indonesian investors. The automotive equivalent of a brilliant artist who couldn't pay rent. The early 1990s were brutal for exotic manufacturers. Jaguar's XJ220 promised a V12 and delivered a V6. Buyers literally sued. Bugatti's EB110 was brilliant but commercially catastrophic. The Cizeta V16T barely reached double-digit production. Against that backdrop, Vector's struggles seem almost normal. The entire supercar industry was collapsing under recession, emissions regulations, and unrealistic expectations. That 19 W8s were actually built and delivered is remarkable. Most competitors fared far worse. After seizing Vector, Megatech developed the M12. It looked like a Vector but had a Lamborghini 5.7-liter V12 heart. More reliable? Yes, Lamborghini actually knew how to build engines. But was it a real Vector? The aerospace construction was simplified. Now, the American V8 character was gone. The fighter jet cockpit was diluted. Megatech built a handful before bankruptcy in '99. The Vector name continued briefly under various owners, but the original vision, Wiegert's aerospace American supercar, died with the Indonesian takeover. Wiegert never stopped trying. Throughout the 2000s and 2000, he announced various Vector revivals, the WX8, partnership deals, investor presentations. None reached production. He attended car shows, gave interviews, defended his legacy against critics who called him a fraud. On January 15, 2021, Gerald Wiegert died at age 76, having never built another production car after losing Vector. But he'd proven something important. An American designer with enough ambition and aerospace knowledge could create a supercar that matched or exceeded Europe's best. The execution failed. The dream was real. Let's settle the performance debate once and for all. Tested figures from period reviews. Car and driver recorded 3.8 seconds to 60. Road and track recorded 4.2. Quarter-mile times ranged from 12 flat to 12.6 at speeds up to 124 miles per hour. Skid pad performance hit 0.97 G. Road and Track estimated 218 miles per hour top speed based on redline calculations. Vector claimed 218 to 242, the higher figure from an internal Bonneville test that was never independently verified. When the W8 worked, and that's a significant caveat, it performed at the absolute summit of 1980s supercar capability. So what is the Vector W8's legacy? By production car standards, failure. 19 units, mechanical disasters, corporate implosion, armed standoffs. By engineering standards, remarkable. Genuine aerospace construction, verified supercar performance, technology ahead of its time. By cultural standards, legendary. The poster car for American ambition, the cautionary tale for dreamers without infrastructure. By dream standards, triumph. Wiegert imagined an American aerospace supercar and actually built it, even if only 19 times. The most successful failure, or failed success, in supercar history. The Vector W8 represented a specific moment in American automotive history. The late 80s, Japanese manufacturers crushing Detroit, American muscle, a fading memory, the Corvette, the only domestic performance car that mattered. Into this vacuum stepped Wiegert's aerospace fantasy, proving America could compete in the supercar arena through technology rather than tradition. It was America's answer to decades of European supercar dominance, even if America wasn't ready to hear it. The F40, the Diablo, the 959, all became legends. The Vector became a cautionary tale, but for 19 customers, it was the ultimate American dream. More power than Ferrari, better acceleration than Lamborghini, aerospace technology that wouldn't become standard for another 20 years. 19 built, company destroyed by Indonesians, designer died without building another. This was either the most successful failure or the most failed success in supercar history. The Vector W8 twin-turbo was never a good car, not in any conventional sense. The transmission came from your grandmother's Toronado. The reliability made Italian exotics look like Corollas. The company collapsed in lawsuits and armed standoffs. But it was never about being good. It was about being impossible. About proving that aerospace technology could make a streetcar faster than Ferrari. About showing that American ambition could match European heritage. 19 W8s exist, approximately $450,000 each when new. 3.8 seconds to 60, 625 horsepower, or 1200 at maximum boost. Fighter jet cockpit, aerospace construction, armed guards, one man's vision built for exactly 19 customers before being destroyed by Indonesian investors and corporate warfare. The Vector didn't fail because it was bad. It failed because it was too good for the infrastructure that created it. This is Supercar Chronicles, where fighter jets meet burned carpets and Indonesian gangsters. Speaking of impossible dreams built in sheds, our episode on the Pagani Zonda shows how Horacio Pagani started with nothing and created one of the most beautiful supercars ever made. Links on screen now. Subscribe for more insane automotive stories. And if you want to fuel more deep dive research like this, the link's in the description. This is Supercar Chronicles, where aerospace meets insanity.